so much once again, and with this we will move towards our next session, that is on the topic Sustainability Education Culture for Future Ready Organizations. And for this I would like to invite on stage Shalmalee Nath, who is head of APAC Climate School at 𝗟𝗗𝗏𝗏. Giving a brief introduction for Shalmalee, she has spent the last decade building businesses across learning-focused organizations like 𝗬𝗂𝗃𝗏, LinkedIn, Harvard Business Publishing, 𝗘𝗱𝗏𝗏, and is now focusing on leveraging her experience to build Climate School, an ecosystem to accelerate sustainability goals through understanding and action. As head of APAC mission, her goal is to ensure no committed organization in the region lacks the resources to get started on their journey. And with this, please welcome Shalmalee with a huge round of applause.
Hi, good morning. It's wonderful to be here. As 𝗟𝗏𝗏 introduced me, basically I've been a part of L&D forums like this where we keep discussing what the emerging future of learning at certain junctures throughout time has been. So I've essentially seen several conversations around what new formats of learning, what are the new generations of learning, what is happening in technology, how learning is kind of enabling digital transformation, and the topic that the keynote speaker really mentioned about how learning is becoming a change agent and really leading that conversation forward. So it's exciting to be here and see many of these conversations being taken forward into the next generation of what's going to be. But specifically, as we talk about L&D in the future of L&D, if you will, I feel like several forums are missing the flavor of talking about what the future imperative of sustainability transition is and how L&D will have to play a role there. So this is a deep topic, and I know we have 20 minutes here. So I don't expect to do a lot of deep dive into the topic within the limited time that we have. And I've been on the other side of this, so I'm also empathetic of the fact that in a spiel of 20-minute sessions through the day, there's only limited amount of information that can register and can be taken away. So I'm going to use a principle of micro-learning. I'm going to break up this topic into 5 themes that I want to talk about that are here on the deck behind me. And I'm going to spend no more than probably 2 to 3 minutes each on these themes, with the idea that by the time we wrap up this session, we are at least on the same page about what are the themes we are talking about, what are the trends we are talking about, so that if this is something that you're actually interested in, of course, I will be around for a deeper conversation around that as well. So let's get started. The first piece that I want to talk about is really this imperative of ESG and sustainability and how this is really shaping the business world today. Why is it that the CEOs and boards and executive staff within our organizations are caring so deeply about ESG? Most of you here in this forum are probably aware, but for those of you who are not, ESG stands for environment, social, and governance aspects of an organization's performance. And just as organizations have been reporting on their financial performance through annual reports, disclosures, etc., increasingly large organizations are also having to report on their non-financial performance on these parameters of ESG. And why has this become such an important topic for the CEOs and boards to care about? 3 reasons. The first is it's regulatory, right? So like Padmaja said, you don't want to mess with compliance at all. Regulation is something that is picking pace and evolving very quickly in the sustainability space. EU is leading the fore on this. However, the rest of the world is quickly following suit. Even in India, there are standards around business responsibility and sustainability reporting. And you will find within your organization, sustainability teams are constantly working on their disclosure requirements. The second aspect is beyond regulation, also the fact that ESG investing has started picking pace. So your access to capital and cost of capital is severely impacted by how you're performing on ESG parameters. And the third is ESG and sustainability is largely becoming a global conversation. It's crossing the boundaries of your organization. So even the business opportunities that are accessible to you is determined by how you're performing on these parameters. But there is a case for this beyond compliance, right? There are naysayers who are going to say that, hey, before ESG, there was CSR, and ESG is going to evolve into a higher, standard of compliance tomorrow. But the interesting thing is that broadly, the concept of ESG ties into another global imperative that the United Nations really put forward in 2015, which are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Most of you in the room familiar with this concept? Yeah. So basically, if you look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, they actually map quite well to the aspects of environment, social, and governance aspects. And so what we are trying to say is that whether you talk about compliance or you talk about the underlying move towards sustainability, it is increasingly obvious that business as a world will have to be impacted by not just thinking about economic dimensions, but also factoring in the environment dimension as well as the equity. And when I say equity, I'm meaning the social equity perspective of it, into how business is shaping up. And this demand is going to come from multiple fronts, multiple stakeholders. It's going to come from your financiers and shareholders. It's going to come from every stakeholder that is dealing with you as a customer, whether upstream in your supply chain or downstream in your supply chain. If you're a B2C brand, then your consumers are going to care about how your brand stands for sustainability. And ultimately, all of us are vying for great talent in the market. Guess what? Talent itself has become very discerning. Good talent has become discerning about where they spend their time. What kind of organizations do they work for? And like somebody said before me, the real impact that you make on the purpose front, which is what sustainability is all about. Excuse me, my voice has kind of given up on me just a few days back. So while we've talked about the demand side of sustainability, right, how the business demand is going to shape up, let's spend the next section really talking about how the talent pool and the skill availability, the capability availability in the market is working right now. If I say in a nutshell, basically, unsurprisingly, the demand is taking off. There's a lot of demand for talent in the sustainability space, and the supply has not caught up yet. It's growing, however, it is growing at a much lesser pace compared to how the demand is growing. And this deficit is even more acute in markets like Asia, which has traditionally been a follower kind of market on this kind of a topic. And so what's happening as a result is a lot of the responsibility for the sustainable transition of large organizations is falling, the responsibility is falling on limited shoulders within the organization, which is typically a nucleic small sustainability team within your very large organization. This is an excerpt from a LinkedIn Green Skills report. So here, when I'm dovetailing into one aspect of sustainability, I'm talking about the environmental sustainability side of it, so how the green skills part is playing out. Green skills is basically skills that you need to do green jobs, which are jobs that are essential to the sustainable transition of the economy. So what we're observing is that the intensity with which the green skills demand and supply is growing is far above average when compared to the other emergent skills that the market is working on. What's also interesting is that this trend is happening across sectors, across regions. And what's further interesting for me is even within India as a market, we see that trend playing out, that the relative intensity of green skills is high in India across sectors. But this is just a part of the problem, right? Here we're talking about green skills for green jobs. And like I said, green jobs are especially carved out as jobs that will be exclusively focusing on how do we make our organizations and businesses more sustainable. But if you really talk about sustainability and look at the transformation that is required in businesses, it would be very misleading to believe that you can add a layer of green skills jobs on top of business as usual and expect sustainability to happen. That is not how this is going to work. So when you look at just adding a layer of jobs on top of business as usual, you're only going to have very, very limited impact. And that is what we are observing today. What is more likely to happen and what we really need is the perspective that how can we rethink several traditional jobs, roles that we have today, to some extent or to a large extent, depending on what that particular job is, by transforming several of those roles to include some green skills, an additional kind of skills that will require those roles to become more green, more sustainable. So what is probably obvious as the next section when I say that, what I'm implying is obviously learning and culture custodians within organizations have to play a major role in this. Over the past several months in multiple forums that I've been in where we've heard chief sustainability officers talk about what are the important imperatives, right? When they think about sustainable transition within their organizations, what are the key pillars of success or failure? And that's what I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about. So it starts at the top, right? Unsurprisingly, what they will tell you, and very, rightly so, is that if your organization has to truly commit to this, the alignment has to happen at the top. If your CEO, if your executive staff, if your board does not align with the strategy, does not own it, does not drive it from the top, then bad news, you're probably not going to be able to undertake the transition within the limited time that is available. So therefore, a lot of time that is spent by sustainability officers are with strategizing, rethinking the business, etc., with the CEOs and the board. The second two pillars over here about skills and culture are the dual pillars of transformation. So I'll quickly come back to this in a bit. The fourth thing that they talk about obviously is how do you operationalize this within the organization? What do the changed processes look like? How do you work this within the organization initially to begin? And then how do you roll out these operational changes upstream and downstream, because you also have to work with your supplier network to make an impact. So what's happening today is a lot of the sustainability teams within large organizations are doing well on the strategy and the discussion on operationalizing change front. But the dual pillars of transformation, the skills transformation, or as I like to call it, the capability transformation and the culture transformation, they need basically partners in the journey. And I was listening to the expectation setting at the top of the sessions, and also what my learned colleagues kind of said in the other sessions before mine. There's obviously a lot of focus on capability building and also culture. How do you rethink the culture, learning culture within the organization? We've spent some time talking about capability development skills in the previous section. So let me talk to you a little bit about how important the culture transformation piece is in figuring out the sustainability transition. Some of the key themes that get talked about in sustainability transition are the key elements that your sustainability stakeholders are trying to solve for. By far and away, the most important thing is how do we reduce our carbon footprint? Most of you in the room have heard about net zero commitments, making sure that our organization is meeting net zero targets, is ensuring net zero kind of emissions, etc. And how do we align the entire organization to meeting those targets? The other elements that get discussed within sustainability transition is responsible action and stewardship of water, which is such a crucial resource for so many sectors. There is waste, what we've typically been seen as, waste just from a lens of, plastics and so on. It is now become a dimension of how do you rethink consumption from an erstwhile trend of cradle to grave, where you produce something and then it reaches a landfill somewhere as waste. How do you rethink that entire paradigm more in a circular kind of model, where you're rethinking production and consumption in a cradle to cradle kind of model? And then the other aspects within sustainable transition is how do you ensure ecological balance through biodiversity, And how do you ensure all of this is happening with some element of societal equity and just transition? So all of this transition is happening in a manner that communities can come along in that journey in a justful way. What's probably obvious if you take a moment to reflect on all of these elements is that in order to make any kind of change in how you deal with this, it goes to the heart of what your lifestyle is, what your mindset is, right? In order to reduce carbon footprint, in order to act more responsibly about water, in order to change your mindset about consumption patterns, you really have to work with people's mindset. Without behavioral change, all of the strategizing and operationalizing, etc., that is working today is not going to sustain in the future. And so, the call to the custodians in this room is that we have to get away from the mindset that we are trying to navigate or embrace this change of sustainability that is coming. Rather, we have to get into the steering seat. We have to co-drive this particular journey because the change that is coming from a sustainability transition perspective will only be balanced with two elements. One is the science. What is science suggesting in terms of innovation, in terms of option? But for it to work and for it to work meaningfully, there will require to be meaningful investments in cultural transition, in making people think differently. So if you are in for this, right, if this is a case that you truly believe in, now let's get into the how, right? How do we do this? How do we do this collaboratively with different stakeholders within our organization? Or how do we do this in collaboration with stakeholders outside our organization? Here I will appeal again, begin with the mindset that this is not a problem where you are an add-on kind of partner, right? This is not someone else's problem that you're trying to solve for from the sidelines. So really get into the mindset of the fact that this is a we problem. When we talk about sustainability transition, several aspects of this is very much up our core focus and something that we can do about. If you feel less informed than sustainability stakeholders, schedule and get a few cups of coffee with your sustainability team members, right? Schedule some time with your sustainability officers. They might bring up some of the themes that we are talking about today, but it's very likely that they will give you a much deeper kind of perspective of what is happening within your industry, specifically within your organizations. And when you're having those conversations, those light bulbs will really light up in your mind. You will understand these are the aspects of the transition that I can really do something about, or our team can do really something about. And when you're thinking about that, my appeal is that don't think of it as interventions that can be done as one-off, flash-in-the-pan kind of stuff. Think about initiatives, changes, etc., that you can drive systemically, because we need these changes to stick in the system. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that when you're thinking about, let's say, take the example of how do we drive skilling and culture building within our organization in a systemic fashion. I think the one thing that I've observed across organizations that we work quite closely with in this transition planning is that they don't look at it as an initiative that is coming from the sustainability team down to the rest of the organization, or the L&D team down to the rest of the organization. They really create a groundswell through identifying ambassadors and champions in different part of the organization so that it becomes an organic movement. And so you can really weave in this imperative of skilling and culture transformation throughout the fabric of your entire employee life cycle. You can find ambassadors who ensure that the messaging that you're putting across when recruiting or onboarding people clarifies how important certain goals are to your organization and what is it that this new talent can do to drive it. When you're doing performance evaluation, if your organization is being monitored on or measured on non-financial parameters, why should individuals be any different? How are you ensuring that the individuals are starting to reflect leadership in terms of what actions they are taking, cultural initiatives, etc., they are taking from a sustainability transition perspective. When you talk about building teams, all these cultural initiatives, etc., within the organization, or you're talking about elevating somebody to a leadership position, how do you show ambassadorship of this transition at that level? And then finally, like I said, much of this, actually, a lot of organizations are working on these problems across their organizational boundary lines. There are industry coalitions that have come up which are acting on initiatives. So technology has a coalition, renewable energy, etc., has a coalition where organizations across the board are ideating on different initiatives that they can drive internally. So when you're investing and creating these kind of transformation initiatives within your organization, it's also an opportunity for you to look at talent as circular as well. People who are leaving your organization are probably going to start working within the same industry, within an organization who's your potential supplier or buyer, etc. So you're creating ambassadors for this thought leadership in a systemic fashion. The last piece that I really want to touch on is that this particular problem, like we've dealt with different problems, right? We've dealt with different topics. We've talked about how do we act on different kind of priorities, initiatives at different junctures of time. This is a particularly peculiar problem because there is actually a very hard limit on the time that is available to solve for it. This is a graphic from Stockholm Resilience Center, and it talks about this concept of planetary boundaries, right? All of us share the same planet Earth. And that planet has some very specific boundaries that cannot be breached beyond a certain point for human development to happen sustainably. The bad news is that we've already breached about 5 out of 9 of those boundaries. Some of them irreversibly so, but several of them are still in that zone where we can recapture some of this and do something about it. What I'm trying to say is that there are problems on which, and we've all gone through decision-making courses, so we understand what's irreversible decision versus what's reversible decision and how much time should we really spend on perfecting what we get right before we take action on something. My submission is this is a particular nature of problem where acting today, even if imperfect, right? If I have raised some awareness, some kind of this thing today in you to act on this, my submission is that even if imperfect, even if you do not have full information, what Padmaja was talking about, you're always going to deal with ambiguity. And particularly in this problem where we've pretty much been pushed off a cliff and we are building a aeroplane on the way down, like they say, right? So there is no gratification for delayed perfection. And the cost of not taking action is pretty much the same as cost of waiting for 2 years and getting, in the pursuit of elusive kind of perfection and getting this right. Get started with imperfect incremental action, right? Be informed by science, obviously, but even if you're able to take some incremental action every day, every week, every month, that is what is more meaningful. I will end on this note. I know I'm okay, so while we pull up the next slide, what I wanted to say is we are here in the midst of really eminent professionals who really believe in creating great learning experiences, right? And elevating the learning experience and ensuring that, thank you. Ensuring that, we get recognized for it, we win awards for it, and why not, right? We should obviously vie to create great legacies in terms of designing great experiences, winning awards. There's more awards at the end of today's session, etc. as well, and absolutely that's a form of legacy. And I'm sure there are awards and rewards to be reaped even on our action in designing initiatives for sustainable transformation. But particularly, even the reward of making incremental action towards sustainability transition is a reward in itself. This is one of those problems where the fact that you're making some progress is a reward in itself. And my humble submission is, let there be room for both, right? Let there be perfection on the one side, and let there be incremental action and active participation in sustainability transition happening parallelly. I'm around for, I know we've reached time, but I'm around if you'd like to know more about how this can happen, how other organizations, etc., are doing it. But thank you for being a lovely audience. I had a great time.